From time immemorial, Earth dwellers have been fascinated with the mysterious space beyond this sphere. For countless centuries, religious leaders have acted as intermediaries between our natural world and supernatural worlds created by imaginative human minds. And because of their supposed pipeline to divine guidance, these people were accepted as undisputed sources of knowledge and rule until the Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century, when science and reason began to encroach on these religious domains. A secular nation, the United States of America came into being and separated church from government with the First Amendment to our Constitution, which begins, "Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion." As a result, we have room for a great variety of believers and non-believers. One thing most have in common is the desire for celebrations at key points in life cycles, and at changes in the seasons. And so, Food for Thought Productions is pleased to present a knowledgeable expert who has done considerable research on the subject of holidays and secular celebrations. Mr. Matt Cherry, Executive Director of the Free Thought Center for Inquiry West. Here is Mr. Cherry with our producer, Lee Baker.
Matt, I want to welcome you to our series. I've been hoping to have you come on as a guest for a long time.
Thank you, Lee.
Because you have such interesting duties and activities. You're Executive Director of Center for Inquiry West, but I know that your scope is much wider than that. What are some of the things that you are responsible for?
Well, the Center for Inquiry West is the West Coast headquarters of two national organizations, the Council for Secular Humanism, which publishes Free Inquiry magazine, and CSI-West, which publishes Skeptical Inquirer. And we have a wide range of activities as a center, and I'm trying to be involved in as many as possible.
Right.
At the national and international level, we are involved in trying to promote more reason, more science, more skepticism in the media. And being in Los Angeles, we're very close to the world capital of the entertainment industry.
So we try to,
exactly.
Right.
And we try and have some influence on Hollywood.
Yeah.
And also at the local level, we provide a community center for people who are interested in science and for people who are non-religious and want to put their non-religious values into practice.
Mm-hmm. In other words, you can still be ethical without being religious.
Absolutely, you can be good without God.
Now, I know that you do a lot of traveling. What are some of the other countries and places that you cover in your work?
Well, as you can tell from my accent, I'm originally from Great Britain, and I've worked for the Humanist Organization in Great Britain, for the international movement in Holland, and most of the time I'm based in Buffalo, New York, although I've been in Los Angeles for 9 months now. And in my job I do travel a fair amount across the United States and also abroad to other countries which have interesting projects. Yeah, have movements devoted to science or to rationalism or to humanism. There's many different names, but they all have the same principles and approach.
Right. Now, one of the things that I was curious about, I know that you have done a lot of research and conducted a seminar on secular celebrations.
That's right.
You were saying that the people that came for that training were from a whole...
Yeah, we recently had a training seminar for non-religious ceremonies in Los Angeles at the Center for Inquiry.
Yes.
And that was particularly focusing on non-religious memorial ceremonies and weddings, and training people so they could help people compose those ceremonies and also conduct them. And we had people attending, and people who, after the training, were prepared to go out and offer their services. And they came from San Diego, from Orange County, from Los Angeles, from Ventura County, and right up to Santa Barbara. So we now have people available to the public throughout Southern California who can come and help you compose a ceremony and also to conduct it on a day.
Yes. Now, they're not authorized to make these legal, is that right? How does that, are they, how does that work?
The only ceremony where there's a question about legality is the wedding, because if you're doing a funeral or a baby naming ceremony or anything else, no one who does it has a legal status because there's no legal transition involved, so anyone can conduct it. The only one where legality is a question is the wedding, because after the wedding, the couple want to be married in the eyes of the law as well as married in the eyes of the community. And in fact, in California, secular celebrants are able to legally marry couples because they get a special temporary license from the local county, which allows them on that day to legally marry the couple. So as long as you have advance notice so they can arrange the paperwork, they can legally conduct the wedding.
That could be arranged. Well, we've been talking about life cycles celebrations. What about the other kinds of celebrations that are called holidays, meaning they're holy days, but what about secular versions, or what kind of celebrations would be appropriate?
Well, you're right to say holidays originally comes from the words holy days, and that's where, in our language, the term comes from. But in fact, the actual festivals such as Christmas or Easter or Hanukkah or Passover, traditionally these predate the religions which have now adopted them, and they go back to the very earliest roots of humanity as far as we can see, because they are celebrating the changes of the season. We celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah at midwinter, which is December the 21st. And we also have New Year's around then, which is the same idea. It's the turning of the year. And we have the traditional term solstice, which is when we have the shortest day or the longest day, and the days begin to change.
So you have winter solstice for the shortest day and a summer solstice for the longest day.
And the winter solstice traditionally has been a time that has been celebrated because after the solstice, the days begin to get longer again. So people celebrate that and they look forward to the new year and to the new season, and they celebrate in the depth of winter. They need a little break from the snow and the long nights.
They need a little party.
Exactly.
They need a little party.
And if you look at Easter, the whole origin of Easter is the spring equinox, which is when you reach the midpoint of spring and the nights are as long as the days. And you're celebrating a new beginning of a season, growth and fertility. And if you look at the symbols, even though Easter was taken over by the Christians and they gave it the story of Christ and the resurrection, if you actually look at the symbols we use even in Christian countries, we have the Easter bunny and eggs, and these things are symbolizing fertility and growth and new beginnings. And they predate the Christian festival, and the eggs and the bunny go back to the pagans. And the same is true of a lot of the Christmas symbols, the evergreen tree or the Yule log. These are pagan symbols of the winter solstice.
So those are all the year cycle, as compared to the life cycle,
the changing seasons.
The changing seasons.
When we were talking about weddings and funerals and baby namings, these are the changes in the lives of individuals. These are times when you're going from one period of your life, maybe you were single, to another period of life when you're married and you're looking forward to children. Whereas the seasonal celebrations are times when the whole of society is changing, the whole community. I mean, today we live in a society which is very, in many ways, very ignorant of the changing seasons. They don't matter very much to us, especially in California where they don't change so much.
Because we're no longer an agricultural society. Those were all established by agricultural
And you
changes.
can imagine, before you had electricity, before you had adequate shelter, when your whole livelihood depended on farming and the seasons and the game and the fishing, you paid very careful attention to the changes in your surroundings, in your environment, and you celebrated them, whether you celebrated the harvest or the planting of the crops. These were the most important times of the year, and times of hope and sometimes times of disappointment.
Now, there are other kinds of celebrations, celebrating heroes, for instance, where you have President's Day or things of that nature.
Indeed.
I wanted to ask, what is the value to the individual and what is the value to the community to have these events, these celebrations?
Well, I think any celebration is a time when you can step back from your everyday life and look at some of the bigger issues. Mm-hmm. And this is true of everything you've mentioned. It's true of Christmas, when you're stepping back and looking at the changing of the year, or the New Year. Everyone knows at a New Year you make your New Year resolutions, and
right.
You're saying next year is going to be different. It's a time when you step back and look at the big picture.
Now, the African celebration, I think it's African American, I don't know whether it's celebrated anywhere else, Kwanzaa, is not a religious holiday.
No, that's right. It's a secular celebration which is celebrated by religious and non-religious people alike, but it doesn't have an overt religious content.
It's not a part of the ritual. The religion is not a part of the ritual of Kwanzaa.
It doesn't belong to any religion.
Now, that's a pretty recent holiday.
Yes, very recent.
And that was invented to give a sense of community to African Americans.
Yeah, and if you look at Kwanzaa, each day you celebrate a different value or different principle, whether
it's about values.
Self-reliance or generosity. Each day you focus on a different value, which the values aren't religious. There are many religious people share them, but they're values which are basically shared by the community.
They're not limited.
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, the New Year's time of looking back and deciding the changes and the resolution, that is very similar to the Jewish Yom Kippur.
Yeah.
So, but people who do the New Year's resolutions, they're doing the same thing as the Yom Kippur practices, but it's secular.
Yes, and every culture you look at has some variation on these holidays and these festivals.
Mm-hmm. Now, the coming of age rituals, what is the value of the coming of age as far as?
Well, most cultures have had a ceremony or a festival when you mark the passage from childhood to adulthood.
Yes.
Sometimes it varies when they hold it. It may be at the beginning of puberty or the beginning of full adulthood. But it is a real rite of passage which, first of all, allows the community to publicly celebrate the changing in the age of youngsters and to acknowledge the change which has taken place. But it's also often an occasion when the children have some educational courses, or where traditionally they would have a rite of passage which might involve hunting or some painful passage which would mark their entry into adulthood. And it would mark their taking on new responsibilities and being a full member of the tribe or the community.
Right. So these have really educational components.
Yes. And in the modern context, they are nearly entirely educational, whether it's a Catholic communion where you're learning about the Catholic religion, or bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah where you're learning about your faith and your community, or in some countries, and I know this is true in Scandinavia, I've been to coming of age ceremonies in Norway, they have a very secular ceremony, and for weeks and months leading up to the coming of age, they have educational courses on their civic responsibilities, on their personal responsibilities. It involves sex education, education about their rights as a voter, as an adult citizen. And then at the end of this course, they all come together in a big public ceremony at the town hall, and the mayor presides, everyone in the family comes, they exchange presents, and after that they are a member of the adult community with all the responsibilities and rights that entails.
The rights and responsibilities.
Always go together.
They go together.
Yeah.
They go together, the rights and responsibilities. Well, that's taken over in the secular world, where there are laws about at which age you are enabled to do adult things.
Well, there is not always so much education about the responsibilities that go with these rights, and that's something which maybe we should emphasize more. And if you do it in the right way, the children and the teenagers welcome learning about these things. If you lecture them and say you can't do this, then they may ignore you. Well, but if you say if you get them to think things through and to realize the consequences of their actions, and that with freedom also comes some responsibilities, it can be a great help to them, and something which they can look back on and use in their life later on.
So what you're saying is that when a young person comes to the age when they are entitled to vote,
Yeah.
participate in that way, that there should be some educational requirements as to citizenship.
I think so. I mean, they don't have to pass an exam to be allowed to vote, but before people vote, that's just one example of coming of age, but before they vote, they should be given some education on their civic responsibilities, on the political system, on the choices that they're allowed to make, what they're allowed to do.
Right.
We do the same when they're old enough to drive. You have to pass a driving
Yes.
exam and learn about that. I
Right.
think children should be taught about the dangers and the freedoms of using alcohol when they're 21, or about the dangers and pleasures of sex and how to have a responsible
How to
sexual
manage,
life before
yes.
they come of sexual age.
Right. That's one of the big battlegrounds between the fundamentalist groups and the more liberal
Yes.
about sex education.
And the secular
children.
attitude is that the more children learn, and the more they learn candidly and
more
frankly
intelligently
about sex, and an honest appraisal of sex, not just a sort of it's bad, don't do it, but acknowledging that young people have very strong sexual feelings and that sex is a pleasurable thing. If you
But-
educate them properly about that,
But
as well as the responsibilities,
the responsibilities.
then
right.
they're more likely to behave responsibly. And
Right.
evidence from other countries shows that a very open and frank and honest sexual education makes youngsters more responsible in their behavior.
And cuts down on unwanted pregnancies.
Cuts down on unwanted pregnancies, and even cuts down on the level of teenage sex, as well as the level of unwanted pregnancies, certainly.
Now, there are other kinds of celebrations too, that besides the cycle of the seasons and the life cycle, there are the national celebrations to celebrate.
National holiday festivals and
Yes, like.
Independence Day would be a
Yes,
good example.
yes,
Yeah.
right. So there is a use and a value to
Yes, and
these celebrations.
many of the celebrations, as you say, Independence Day would be when you celebrate American values. And
Yes.
each country has its own special day. St. Patrick's Day is well known in America as the Irish national holiday, and it's when you're celebrating your particular patriotism and your national values and character.
And what's
And that has a value as well.
What's kind of interesting about St. Patrick's Day is that the orange and the black are in conflict. The Orangemen and that's the biggest bar holiday in this country.
Yeah.
But you don't in the bars. You don't see. You only see the Orangemen.
Really?
I know that because we used to have a bar, and that was the biggest night of the year. That was bigger than New Year's, which
Yeah.
I was surprised to know. But in any case, you presented this training seminar for celebrants or officiants and so
Yeah.
forth. Is there literature? What if somebody wants to be able to do that, and they aren't?
Yeah, there's a number of things we can do. If you're just interested in doing one ceremony for yourself or a family member, we have some books we can provide,
I
which
see.
is, one is called Funerals Without God, which obviously is for funerals and memorials. Another is Sharing the Future, and that is for designing and composing and conducting weddings. And a third one is called New Arrivals, and that's designed for baby namings.
Right.
If you're not religious or don't have a particular faith, but you have a new baby and you want to mark the arrival of the baby,
Celebrate the occasion.
you may have a naming ceremony when all your family and friends come. And it's a secular equivalent of a christening or any of the other religious ceremonies to mark the birth of a new baby. So we can provide these books to people, and they can use it themselves to compose their own ceremony, and you may have a family friend conduct
I see.
that ceremony, or they can come to the Council for Secular Humanism or the Center for Inquiry and ask us to provide a trained celebrant who will help them compose the ceremony, who will give them sample readings, help them produce a ceremony which is tailored to their individual
So,
needs,
in
and then
other
they'll
words,
also conduct it.
How long, so there's quite a bit of literature that's
Yeah.
been produced. How long has this movement been in effect, this whole idea of developing custom design?
Well, I think in different cultures it's been going on as long as there have been ceremonies.
I see.
And even in recent times there have been different communities, ethnic groups which have a tradition of non-religious ceremonies. For example, in Germany there's a very strong movement to provide secular funerals and memorials. And when the Germans came over to America in the 19th century and beginning of this century, they brought a lot of those traditions with them. But more recently, at least as far as I know, the move to provide humanist or secular celebrants is the last 3 or 4 years. And this was the first training ceremony we've ever held in
Right, that's why
in
I
Los
was very
Angeles.
curious to hear about it from you, because I didn't know how widespread it was or much.
It's fairly
much about
new,
it.
especially,
It's fairly new.
especially in California.
Right.
But I'm sure there's a huge market for it. If you see there's at least 10% of the population who don't believe in God, and perhaps 30 or 40% who are unchurched, who may have a religious faith, but it's not tied to a particular denomination. All of these people may be interested in having a ceremony, but they may not want a particular priest or pastor or rabbi to conduct it. They may want to create one that fits their own unique beliefs and their own unique situation.
Yeah.
And we help them to do that. We don't have a standard ceremony. We have a whole range of things they can choose
It's a real
from.
custom designed
Entirely.
event.
It fits their needs completely.
One time I went to an event that was staged in Los Angeles where they had a whole series of booths showing how Christmas is celebrated in the various cultures in the different countries, and it's such a range of ways to do that. So how would the American fundamentalists expect these celebrations to be conducted? There's all these varieties.
How would the fundamentalists expect the secular ceremonies to be conducted?
No, they're the religious. When there's such a range
Yes, I mean,
amongst the religious observances.
right. I mean, every religious tradition has changed the way it celebrates these things. I mean, if you look at them, they have common elements, and they also celebrate the same things. As I say, if you even look between the faiths, just looking at Christianity and Judaism, which are probably the two most familiar to Americans, you see that the holidays often mirror each other because they're based on these older holidays of the solstice.
And the original pagan holiday.
Right. And within Christianity, they're celebrated in very different ways in different countries and different cultures. And the idea that somehow these festivals are ordained in one particular way by the Bible has no foundation. The Bible doesn't even mention when Jesus was born. It doesn't say it was in December. It doesn't say December the 25th.
I see.
That was decided later. That was made up later. So the idea that the way we celebrate it is set
even
by
the
the Bible.
date varies, because in Russia, isn't it celebrated in January? And here it's the 25th of December.
And Easter varies between the Orthodox and the Catholic and Protestants.
Now, what do you think, you know, there's a lot of controversy about celebrating holidays in the public schools. How do you think that should be handled? Is there a way that could be handled or should be handled to satisfy?
Well, I think either you have to not celebrate them because any celebration will exclude some people or discriminate against some people, or you have to make a very strong effort to be as inclusive as possible and just to show what celebrations are held by the different faith groups. But very often it's used as a way of celebrating, of sanctioning one group over another. And of course, the group that is given approval is the traditional conservative Christian values, and Christmas.
Because
they
they're
want to
they're the most political.
They're the most political, they're the strongest, and they're the most aggressive. They're the ones who have the least consideration for the other faith groups, very often, I find. So they want to use that as almost as a wedge issue to get some Christianity into the schools.
Well, from what you've been saying, there is a value to celebrations, to the, especially the ones that are common to everybody, which would be the seasonal celebrations. Wouldn't it be feasible to teach about the history of these celebrations and the fact that these various ways of dealing with them?
Yeah,
would that be a way to do it?
I think that would be great if they could say all these different faiths and cultures celebrate the winter solstice in different ways. And you have Kwanzaa, and you have Hanukkah, and you have Christmas, and you have the winter solstice. But I suspect a lot of conservative Christians wouldn't like that, because it's putting their holiday, which they feel to be the birth of Jesus, into too much context. And it's saying, look, they say it's the birth of Jesus, but all these other faiths also celebrate the birth of something, the birth of the new year.
Spring.
They might not like that explanation.
I'm quite sure they would oppose that, but if you have an alternative to suggest,
I think it could be done in a sensitive way. Which
in other words, if you're saying no, you need a no to something, you need to offer an alternative. And the reason I wanted to do this interview with you is because you've given us backgrounds and why and when and all of that. That could be the alternative.
I agree. I think there should be a celebration of diversity, which celebrates all the different holidays and traditions.
So, well, is there any other message that you have for the people that might be interested in knowing more about the history of holidays? Is there a lot of literature on this?
There's not as much as there should be, but if anyone is interested in, particularly in personal ceremonies such as the weddings or the funerals or the coming of age or new babies, they can contact the Council for Secular Humanism, or in Los Angeles the Center for Inquiry, and we'll provide them with information, with celebrants who will conduct it, and with the support to compose their own ceremony, which will be dignified, personal, and will be a unique occasion they can remember.
Well, it seems like we've run out of time for this occasion, and I want to thank you very much.
Thank you
for this.
It's a pleasure.
And we'll do it again sometime.
Great.
Thank you.
We hope you have found this program intellectually stimulating and that you will continue to investigate the ideas raised here. To connect with other like-minded individuals, please contact any of the dozens of free thought organizations, such as the American Humanist Association, American Atheists, the Center for Inquiry, and Atheists United. You may also email the producer directly via leebaker27@gmail.com. This program has been distributed through the courtesy of Atheists United.